friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. I am quite a bit late with this wrap-up video, but I'm here today to talk about the books that I read in the month of May. And let me tell you, it was a huge reading month. I read 21 books in the month of May. That's insane! 7 of them I've already talked to you about in my mid-month wrap-up, so I will just quickly mention them here. I read From NetGalley, Lakeshire Park. I read A Single Thread, an audiobook by Tracy Chevalier, and also on audiobook I listened to The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa, and also on audiobook I listened to The Cruelest Month by Louise Penny. And then the 3 other books that I read at the beginning of the month that I already talked about are By the Book by Julia Sonneborn, The Dream Daughter by Diane Chamberlain, and As Bright as Heaven by Susan Meissner. So if you want to know my thoughts about those 7 books, you can check out my mid-month wrap-up. I will link it above and also in the description box below. I don't want to spend time on those 7 books here because I have 14 other books to talk to you about today. Whew! It was a fantastic reading month. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is that I made some progress in some series this month, and that feels really good. These are not in any kind of an order. I just kind of stacked them up in different piles. So let's just jump right in. First of all, I'll talk about the 4 middle grade books that I read in the month of May. I did have a weekend reading vlog where I talk about some of these. I've been doing this for the last couple months where I take one weekend to put aside other things that I'm reading and just focus on middle grade, and I did that again in May and loved it. So I did read The Night Gardner by Jonathan Auxier. He is the author of Sweep, The Story of a Girl and Her Monster, which was the group read for Middle Grade March last year. I've been wanting to read more from him, and this was delightfully creepy. It follows this young girl and her brother who go to be house servants for this rich family who have some secrets, and there are some fantastical elements. There's this tree that's a little bit creepy and this ghost-like creature called the Night Gardner, the title. But this was a lot of fun. I gave it 4 stars. I do enjoy his writing quite a bit, and this would be a fun one to read in the fall. And I don't like scary books, so this was just the right amount of like fun creepiness. So I really enjoyed that one. A definite 5-star middle grade book that it's one of those books that you just want to hug when you're done reading it, and it's Until Tomorrow, Mr. Marsworth by Sheila O'Connor. I'm going to be singing the praises of this book for a long time, I think. I just absolutely loved it. We follow Renee Kelly, who is a young girl who with her siblings moves to her grandmother's house for the summer. Her mom, I think, had passed away, and her dad was working on the roads in North Dakota. This takes place in 1960s, late 1960s, and Rainey gets a paper route, and on her paper route, one of the houses is this recluse man who doesn't leave his house, really. She's never met him in person. She writes him a note about kind of introducing herself. I'm your new paper girl, and this turns into correspondence. So this is an epistolary novel. It is all written in letters between Renee and Mr. Marsworth. It takes place during the Vietnam War, and Renee's older brother is 18 or just about to turn 18 and has to decide whether he's going to sign up to serve or be drafted or go to college. Like, there's just a lot of decisions to happen in that family, and it's during the time where American people were not very kind to those who opposed the war. So Renee is this headstrong, loyal, deeply devoted sister who is trying to keep her brother out, away from being drafted and away from the war. And she's expressing all of these thoughts and concerns to Mr. Marsworth, who has his own thoughts and concerns. So she really begins to learn about conscientious objecting, and Mr. Marsworth is a voice teaching her, and a voice of wisdom and care, and also a little bit of surliness in there. Yeah, it just is delightful and heartwarming, and I absolutely fell in love with Renee and Mr. Marsworth, and there were some wonderful surprises towards the end that I wasn't expecting. I just really loved this book. I really, really, really loved this book. So if you are at all interested in middle grade, or historical fiction or epistolary novels, this one might be one to pick up. Definitely a 5-star read for me. Then I read another sequel. I read book 2 in the Land of Stories. I read book 1 last year during middle grade March. So in this one, we continue to follow brother and sister duo, Alex and Connor, who we meet in the first book when they travel into this fairy tale book that their grandmother had given them. And they learn some things about their family, and this fairy tale world is kind of a combination of all the different fairy tales. So there's Cinderella and Snow White and Little Red Riding Hood and Sleeping Beauty. They all kind of live in the same world. So this is similar to the first book in that Alex and Connor are able to get back to the Land of Stories, and there's a new villain to fight, basically. So I can't tell you too much more about that, but this did leave on a sort of cliffhanger that has me very eager to pick up the third book. I really enjoyed this. I think I gave it 3, 4. I don't remember what I rated it, but I do remember that I really enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to continuing in this series. The final middle grade book that I read in May is The Wednesday Wars, and I'm glad that I read this by Gary D. Schmidt around the same time as Until Tomorrow, Mr. Marsworth. This one also takes place during the Vietnam War, and while it's kind of a background setting, it does affect some of the characters in here very greatly. This one takes place a lot during the school day. This middle school student named Holling Hood, what a name. We just kind of follow his day-to-day thought processes and friendships and how those friendships change from the beginning to the end. His teacher is pretty strict, but definitely loves her students. It's definitely a school setting book. I thought the writing, however, was incredibly clever. There were some things that surprised me in the writing of this. There were some funny moments, some heart-touching moments, and I definitely recommend this one as well. And I gave this one 5 stars because it was just wonderful. I loved it. A series that I had started before BookTube days that I picked up again this month because I found the first one on Hoopla, and I wanted to reread from the beginning. I have a couple of the books later on in the series, but I wanted to go back and restart the series, and I don't know the name of the series, but it's Melanie Dickerson's YA kind of fairy tale retelling series. She's a Christian author, and these are definitely very faith-based. This is the second book, but I also read Healer's Apprentice, which is the first one, and Fairest Beauty, which is the third one, along with The Merchant's Daughter, which is the second one. I don't know which fairy tale Healer's Apprentice kind of pairs up with, or if it does, but I know Merchant's Daughter is kind of a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and then the Fairest Beauty is a Snow White retelling. I love the nods to the fairy tales that are in these, and these were a nice kind of escapist type of reading. They were very quick to read. Definitely, if you're interested in a YA, Christian fiction, faith-based fairy tale retelling series, these are very well done. They all interlock with each other. The story, the Hagenheim series, because it takes place mostly around this city or nation called Hagenheim. I think it's more of a city. It's referenced in all the books, I think. And so the characters kind of overlap and intertwine with each other, and I'm really enjoying it. And I've already read the 4th one in May. Nope, it's June. In June. So I'm continuing on with that series so that I can totally get caught up with where Melanie Dickerson is right now. So I read 3 of them in May. Pretty cool. Also, another series that I made progress in, I already talked about listening to The Cruelest Month by Louise Penny. This was book 3 in the Armand Gamache series, and I did pick up book 4, A Rule Against Murder. And this one is a little bit different because the murder and the investigation and everything doesn't take place in the town of Three Pines as the first 3 books did. This one takes place at this kind of B&B, not too far away from Three Pines, but Armand Gamache, our inspector, and his wife travel there every year for their anniversary. And this year, while they were there, there was this other big family who are related to some people in Three Pines, which we find out that was a fun surprise for me. They're having their family reunion at the same B&B. The murder takes place from someone in the family. And this family is very wealthy and very cold and have a lot of secrets and a lot of masks that they wear, even with each other. And Armand and his wife just kind of at first have fun, not making fun of them, but speculating about what's really going on and things. And then this murder happens, and Armand Gamache's whole team shows up, and they do their investigation, which is always so amazing. I love how Louise Penny always makes me care about the characters, and it's just as much about the character development as it is about the murder and the picking up of the clues and trying to figure out what's going on. I really, really enjoy her writing and am thrilled to be continuing on with this series. And this is book 4, and I've already read book 5 in June. So I'm definitely pretty proud of how I'm progressing with some series this year. A book that I had to read for the Book 2 prize for round 2 was The Other Americans by Leila Lalami. And I can tell you about my thoughts on this now because the announcement has already been made for round 3. And unfortunately, I forgot to respond that I'm able to participate in round 3, so I will not be participating over the summer. Might be nice to have a little break, but I hopefully will hop back in for the final round in the early fall. But this is also kind of a murder mystery. We learn very early on that this father of this family was killed in a hit and run as he was walking home from work or something like that at this intersection. And so it's this Moroccan family, and the story is told through so many different perspectives, different people in the town, co-workers, family members. I think there were 7 to 10 different people that we're hearing from pretty consistently, and I could have that number wrong, but it just felt like a lot. The chapters were all very short. I did listen to this on audiobook, and one of the things that I struggled with is that the different voices of the different people were not very distinct from one another. As I talked about with As Bright as Heaven, this one is told from 4 different perspectives, and each perspective had a very clear voice and was very different, and you knew immediately almost who was talking. If you didn't read the chapter title, you would still know. This one felt a little bit the same from person to person. However, I did appreciate the conversation about race. This is a Moroccan family, and they struggled with different people in the town and different attitudes that were thought of them, and a lot of family drama as well between the 2 siblings and the mother, the widowed mother now. So there were, I think I ended up giving this one 3 stars. It wasn't boring by any means. I continued to want to know what was going on, but it definitely didn't blow me away in the writing style or in the structure of how it was told. But I did think that it had some good conversations about different things in there. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but I am glad that I picked it up and read it. So there's that. I have one more audiobook that I listened to this month, and I did listen to Ballad of Songbird and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This is the prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy, which I almost wish that I had reread the Hunger Games before listening to this book, but because it was available on Hoopla, I think very, very shortly after it was released, it was just released in May, and I was so shocked that it was already available on Hoopla that I just wanted to listen to it right away, and so I did. There were a ton of Easter eggs about different things that happened in the Hunger Games that were in the Ballad of Songbird and Snakes, and I feel like I would have picked up on even more of those had the Hunger Games been more fresh in my mind. So in Ballad of Songbird and Snakes, we really follow Coriolanus Snow, who is President Snow in the Hunger Games. We follow him when he's a young man and in school and for the first year or so after school. And I always am a little nervous when a villain has a backstory, because I always think the author's going to make you try to have compassion and just get a different perspective of the villain and feel differently towards them. And I didn't want to like President Snow. And so I was thankful that I left this book still not really caring for President Snow, or Coriolanus Snow. It was a little bit long. I feel like it could have been cut a little shorter. I'm not sure that it's really necessary to the story as a whole, but I did find it interesting, and I was along for the ride, and it was a fun audiobook. I thought the narrator did a fantastic job. Yeah, I just really did enjoy it. So I don't want to tell too much of the story, But we do kind of see a different version of the Hunger Games. This was not when the Hunger Games started, but they were very different. I forget how many years. This was like the 12th or the 13th Hunger Games. And we're in like the 70th something Hunger Games with Katniss and all that, and the actual trilogy. So it's quite a bit before, and you see the Capitol before it's the Capitol in the Hunger Games, and how things are different and where they're headed. There were some great villains in this one as well, some leaders in the Capitol that you can kind of see how they impact and influence Coriolanus Snow to become the person that he is later. So I did appreciate this book, and I did enjoy it. I think I ended up giving it 3 or 4 stars. I am the worst with stars, guys. Sorry. If you're here to know my actual rating, I'm not really that great at remembering. But I did enjoy it, and I think if you really enjoy the Hunger Games, it's worth listening to or reading. But I also don't think you're really missing out too much by not listening to it or reading it. I think I mentioned in my mid-month wrap-up that I was reading 5 Feet Apart by Rachel Lippincott. I may have even finished this in the end of that video and added it on to the end. I can't remember now. But this is a YA about some teenagers who have cystic fibrosis. And I read this as part of Quarantine-a-thon. And then after this one, I kind of gave up on Quarantine-a-thon. Whoops. Sorry, April. But I read this because one of the prompts for the second week, I think, was to read a book with people who are more vulnerable to COVID-19. CF is a disease that really impacts lungs and breathing, and that is definitely, they're definitely very vulnerable. I thought that this one was okay, but I ended up not really loving it. I do still want to watch the movie adaptation at some point. I've heard that the distance that I feel from the characters in here is translated a little better into the screen so that you kind of understand them a little bit better maybe. But it was okay. It was fine. Didn't blow me away. The last 3 that I have to talk about were all buddy reads, and I love doing buddy reads, and I was thrilled to read these with some wonderful ladies. I finished The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. I read this with Emily from Burrowing Into Books on Instagram. This is a chunker, and we started it, I think, in April, but we did finally finish this in May, and this is the 3rd book in the Mistborn trilogy, and it took me 3 years to finish it, and I'm so sad that it took me so long, but this was fantastic. It's so long, but it definitely didn't feel slow at any parts. I was always very invested in what was going on. I loved the continuation of Vin's story in here. I love how Brandon Sanderson does not shy away from making big moves with the people in his stories. I obviously can't tell you too much about the story of this, but we do travel outside of Luthadel, which is the main city that you read about in the first book. So we get to learn a little bit more about the world outside of Luthadel and the world as a whole and how things ended up the way that they were, like with the ash coming down and the mists, which are a big part of the first 2 books as well. We learn a lot more about that. Some of my favorite characters in here made some choices that were definitely very surprising and bold, and I really loved it. I really loved this book. I'm so excited that I finished another trilogy, but this one was very good. It was very good. 5 stars. I think I gave it 5 stars. I also read Next Year in Havana by Chanel Clee, and this is the one that I had to read or unhaul for my TBR unhaul project, which I'm just now realizing I didn't look at June to see which books I'm supposed to read this month or else get rid of. I'll have to take a look at that and let you know in my mid-month wrap-up in just a couple days. But I did read this with Lindsay from Lindsay's Little Library, and unfortunately we did not love this. Neither of us loved this as much as so many other people. We do follow a 2 timelines, but not very spread apart. So it's basically a grandmother's timeline and her granddaughter. So their lives intersect a little bit as well, but we learn about both of these women and their experience in Cuba. The grandmother living in Cuba and then escaping to Miami, and then the granddaughter traveling from Miami to Cuba. Some of the things that I loved about it is learning about Cuba and Batista and Fidel Castro and that change of government and what that was like for people, both during the time when it was actually happening at the beginning of Castro's reign and the revolution, but then also about like 50 years later, and how the people were responding at that point and what life had been like for them for the past 50 years, and contrasting that with life in Miami of Cuban Americans now. So I really liked that, learning about that history. I didn't particularly love the way that Chanel Clayton told us all of that. There was a lot of telling. I felt like dialogue would be broken apart with pages or paragraphs of this information download. Like, it just broke apart the story in a way that didn't keep it very flowing for me. While I enjoyed learning about the information, it broke up the story, and maybe that's what kept me from really investing in these characters. The other thing is that I didn't really care for is the love interest. The granddaughter story, Marisol, she travels to Cuba and is only there for less than 2 weeks, I think, and has this love at first sight kind of a situation with a love interest in Cuba. And I didn't believe it. I didn't believe their chemistry. I didn't believe that relationship at all. So that was really difficult because that was a big part of the story. There was a surprise towards the end of some situations from her grandmother's life that played a part in Marisol's experience in Cuba that I really appreciated. Yeah, so it was a mixed bag for me. There was definitely things that I liked and definitely things that I didn't. So this one ended up with a 3 stars. But I did love reading this with Lindsay, and I love that we were on the same page. Sometimes it's nice when you're have different views so that you can kind of learn and bounce back ideas from that respect. But it also was kind of nice because we were both really expecting to love this, and it didn't happen for either of us. So that was a bit of a bummer, but I loved talking about it with Lindsay. And the final book I think I also talked about in my mid-month wrap-up, The Girl He Used to Know. I read this with Chloe from Always Booked. This is by Tracy Garvis Graves. And in this one, we follow an autistic woman. I don't know if she's ever officially labeled as autistic, but she definitely appears to be on the spectrum. And we kind of follow her in college and what life was like for her in college and her roommate. And then also we are getting... it's 10 years after college, and this boy that she had met in the chess club in college and became really good friends with and had a relationship with, and then 10 years later she runs into him again, and we kind of see how she has adapted to life and grew since college, and the strength that she has and the way that she managed social situations and work situations and how successful she was. I really appreciated that. And I really loved Jonathan. This book just had such a kindness about it, the way that people treated each other, especially at the beginning, and loyalty and friendships and patience with each other and just grace. I really appreciated that. The book did seem to have a totally different feel when we got to a certain point in the ending, and things totally took a different turn. And that gentleness, that I think that's the word that I kept using when I was talking with Chloe. It just felt so gentle. That gentleness definitely changed. And I'll tell you that 9/11 plays a part in this book, and I didn't even put 2 and 2 together. I mean, there are dates on the chapters, even in the beginning. You kind of know because it happens. We start the story in August of 2001. So I just didn't think September 2001 is when 9/11 happened, and for some reason I just wasn't prepared for that. I wasn't that observant of a reader, I guess, but so 9/11 definitely plays a part in this, and I felt like some of the behaviors that happened post 9/11 and the experiences that they walked through were a little out of character maybe. However, I still really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and whenever there's going to be a question about who is your book boyfriend, Jonathan might be a contender because I really just liked him a lot. So yeah, I'm so glad that I read this with Chloe, and I've really enjoyed it. So that is the 21 books that I read, well, the 14 books that I read the second half of the month. Again, check out my mid-month wrap-up from May to check out the books that I read at the beginning of the month. Here's some of them. I'm not including all of them because I listen to some audiobooks as well, but I would love to talk with you about any of these books, about if you've read them or not. Did you have any of the same or different feelings from me? I would love to hear that. I'm going to set those down. And that's it. But let's chat down in the comments below. I love you guys so much, and I'm so thrilled that you are still here as a part of my channel, and I appreciate you being here. So let's chat down in the comments. You guys know I love talking with you down there. Give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will definitely be talking to you in another video very soon. Bye.